Dr. John Thomas was the founder of the Christadelphian movement, a Restorationist, with doctrines similar in part to some 16th-century Antitrinitarian Socinians and the 16th-century Swiss-German pacifist Anabaptists. Early life. John Thomas MD, born in Hoxton Square, Hackney, London, on April 12, 1805, was the son of a dissenting minister, also named John Thomas. His family is reputed to be descended from French Huguenot refugees. His family moved frequently, as his father took up various pastorships, including a congregation in London, a brief but eventful stay in northern Scotland, back to London, and then up to Chorley, Lancashire. John Thomas was a very disciplined student, having taught himself Hebrew as a teenager. At the age of 16, in Chorley, he began studying medicine. His family moved back to London, but John Thomas stayed in Chorley. After 2 years, he returned to London to continue his studies at the Guy's and St Thomas's hospitals for a further 3 years. He trained as a surgeon and had a keen interest in chemistry and biology, publishing several learned medical articles for The Lancet, one of which argued in favor of the importance of the use of corpses for the study of medicine. Emigration to the United States. Like many people of that era, in 1832, his father made the decision to seek fresh opportunities and emigrate to America. So it was that Dr. John Thomas, having few ties, decided to go with his family, agreeing to go on ahead and prepare for the family. He took the opportunity to further his career and accepted an appointment as ship's surgeon on the Marquis of Wellesley, which was bound from St. Catherine Docks, London to New York. The ship embarked on May 1, 1832, and immediately sailed into stormy weather that lasted the whole voyage. During one ferocious storm, the ship lost the top of the main mast, and heavy seas stove in the bulwarks, washing everything movable off the deck. The ship eventually ran into shallow water and ran aground off the coast of Nova Scotia. The ship was raised up by the waves on 12 successive occasions, each time the keel striking the seabed with such force that both crew and passengers were convinced the ship would break up. Fearing that his life was about to end, Thomas, determined to die with a prayer on his lips, prayed for mercy. He was very conscious of a void in his knowledge about what was to happen to him should he die. Thus he made a vow to dedicate his life, should he be spared, to religious study and to seeking out the truth about the matter of life and death. Aided by a change in wind direction, the captain's efforts to turn the ship back out to sea were successful, and after one final bone-jarring grounding, the ship floated free. Thomas never forgot his vow and spent the rest of his life devoted to Bible study, determined to understand the true message of the Scriptures. Association with Alexander Campbell. The Marquis of Wellesley docked in New York, and Thomas traveled on to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he became convinced by the Restoration movement of the need for baptism and joined them in October 1832. He later came to know a prominent leader in the movement, Alexander Campbell, who encouraged him to become an evangelist, spending his time traveling around the eastern states of America preaching, until eventually settling down as a preacher in Philadelphia. It was here on the 1st of January 1834 that he married Ellen Hunt, who became his lifelong companion and constant support throughout the trials of faith that persisted throughout his life. Dr. Thomas also read for and was editor of the Apostolic Advocate, which first appeared in May 1834. His studies during this period of his life generated the foundation for many of the beliefs he came to espouse as a Christadelphian, and he began to believe that the basis of knowledge before baptism was greater than the Restoration movement believed, and also that widely held Orthodox Christian beliefs were blatantly wrong. Whilst his freedom to believe his unique beliefs was accepted, many objected to the preaching of these beliefs as necessarily for salvation. This difference led led to a series of debates, particularly between Dr. Thomas and Alexander Campbell, because Thomas eventually rebaptized himself and rejected his former beliefs and associations. He was formally disfellowshipped in 1837. Some people, nonetheless, associated with him and accepted his views. At this time the Millerite or Adventist movement was growing, and in 1843 Dr. Thomas was introduced to William Miller, the leader of the Millerites. He admired the willingness to question orthodox beliefs and agreed with the belief in the second coming of Christ and the founding of a millennial age. Upon his return, Dr. Thomas continued his studies of the Bible and in 1846 traveled to New York, where he gave a series of lectures covering 30 doctrinal subjects that later formed part of his book Help Is Israel, Christadelphians. Based upon his newfound understanding of the Bible, Thomas was rebaptized in 1847, and the groups of congregations and individuals who shared his beliefs continued to grow. In 1848 the movement became international when he traveled to England in order to preach what he now saw as the true gospel message. Upon his return to America, Dr. Thomas moved from Richmond, Virginia, to New York City and began to preach there. He made a point of speaking to the Jewish community because Dr. Thomas had come to believe that Christianity did not replace the law of Moses but rather fulfilled it. He believed that Christians must, through faith and baptism, become the seed of Abraham. It was at this time that Dr. Thomas and those who shared similar beliefs became known as the Royal Association of Believers. This group of believers used the term ecclesia, a Greek word meaning assembly, to describe them. However, the movement did not have an official name until 1864, when a name was chosen during the American Civil War. Instead of having a system of clergy, all the brethren took equal responsibility on a rota to take on the role of presiding and speaking during the meetings. When in 1861 the American Civil War broke out, Dr. Thomas traveled to the South and became concerned that the war had placed believers upon opposing sides. The movement as a whole considered that the war required them to make a stand for what they believed in as conscientious objectors. In order to be exempted from military service, it was required that believers had to belong to a recognized religious group that did not agree with participation in war. Thus, in 1864, Thomas coined the name Christadelphian to identify members of the movement. The term Christadelphian comes from Greek and means brethren in Christ. It was during the war that Dr. Thomas worked on the 3 volumes of Eureka, which discusses the meaning of the Book of Revelation. On May 5, 1868, Dr. Thomas returned to England, where he traveled extensively giving lectures about the gospel message and meeting with Christadelphians in England. During this period of his life he found extensive support and help from Robert Roberts, who had been converted during a previous visit to England by Dr. Thomas. Following his return to America, he made one final tour of the Christadelphian congregations prior to his death on the 5th of March 1871 in Jersey City. He was buried in the Greenwood Cemetery, Brooklyn, New York. Legacy. Thomas did not claim to be any kind of prophet, or in any way inspired, but through study and borrowing from the work of others he believed that many traditional church teachings were incorrect and that from the Bible he could prove the position. The lecturer commenced by denying a statement which had appeared in many of the London and county newspapers, and amongst them, one made by a religious editor in this town, to the effect that he assumed to himself the true, infallible, prophetic character, as one sent from God, verbatim. He would appeal to his writings, and he had written a great deal in 12 years, and to his speeches, whether he had ever claimed to be such, in the remotest degree whatever. He believed truth as it was taught in the scriptures of truth. Modern Christadelphians generally believe Thomas was right and adhere to the positions he established as defined within the Christadelphian statements of faith. Christadelphians feel, too, that Thomas' example of an inquiring attitude is also an important legacy. Thomas wrote several books, one of which, Helpers Israel, in its first section, sets out many of the fundamental scriptural principles believed by Christadelphians to this day. Thomas' exposition of Bible prophecy led to him making various detailed predictions about then current-day events, many of which did not come to pass, as was noted in the foreword to subsequent editions of Helpers Israel after his death, a point that Thomas himself accepted could happen. Thomas' main focus, however, on the re-establishment of a national homeland for the Jews in Israel and the role Great Britain would play in its statehood, have seemed to prove broadly accurate. This is seen by many Christadelphians as evidence that Thomas had a broadly correct understanding of the main thrust of Bible prophecy. Around 1850, Thomas read the following, based on his understanding of what the Bible said about the return of the Jews to the land of Palestine. There is, then, a partial and primary restoration of Jews before the manifestation, which is to serve as the nucleus, or basis, of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-adventual colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of the Messiahship of Jesus, and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate thither as agriculturists and traders, in the hope of ultimately establishing the Commonwealth, but more immediately of getting rich in silver and gold by commerce with India, and in cattle and goods by their industry at home under the efficient protection of the British power. But to what part of the world shall we look for a power whose interests will make it willing, as it is able, to plant the ensign of civilization upon the mountains of Israel? The reader will, doubtless, anticipate my reply from what has gone before. I know not whether the men who at present contrive the foreign policy of Britain entertained the idea of assuming the sovereignty of the Holy Land, and of promoting its colonization by the Jews. The present intentions, however, are of no importance one way or the other, because they will be compelled, by events soon to happen, to do what, under existing circumstances, heaven and earth combined could not move them to attempt. The present decisions of statesmen are destitute of stability. The finger of God has indicated a course to be pursued by Britain which cannot be evaded, and which her councillors will not only be willing, but eager, to adopt when the crisis comes upon them. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the British Mandate of 1922 established Britain as the political force in charge of Palestine. After British rule, the secular state of Israel was established in 1948. Bibliography. Books: Anastasis, The Apostasy Unveiled, Blasphemy and the Names of Blasphemy. The Book Unsealed, a lecture on the prophetic periods of Daniel and John. Catechesis. Chronicon Hebraicon. Destiny of the British Empire is revealed in the Scriptures. Helpers Israel. Eternal Life. Eureka. An exposition of the Apocalypse. Exposition of Daniel. Faith in the Last Days. How to Search the Scriptures. The Last Days of Judah's Commonwealth. Mystery of the Covenant of the Holy Land explained. Odology. Phaneresis. The Revealed Mystery. Magazines: The Apostolic Advocate, The Herald of the Future Age, Herald of the Kingdom and Age to Come. Bibliography. Peter Hemingway, John Thomas, His Friends and His Faith. Charles H. Lippy, The Christadelphians in North America. Robert Roberts, Dr. Thomas, His Life and Work. Available online. Angelfire.com. Brian R. Wilson, Sects and Society, A Sociological Study of the Elim Tabernacle, Christian Science and Christadelphians.